Hello everyone, and welcome back to the 5th episode in our CSS Grid mini-series. Now in this video we're going to be talking about 3 more miscellaneous type topics that regarding grid formatting and kind of just the way the grid operates. So those 3 topics will be grid auto rows / implicit rows. Then we will be covering the difference between auto fit and auto fill. And if you remember, auto fit was that kind of grid concept we used in a couple episodes ago to essentially automatically size our grid items based on basically based on how big the window is. And there's an alternative called autofill that we are going to look into, and then named areas, which allow us to instead of using columns, like saying column 5 through column 10, we could actually name it and say column 5 through column 10 is like our main content area, so we just want to use that instead. So yeah, we're going to go ahead and jump into a recap of our code really quick. So in the last episode, we had this right here, and this code right here creates this, actually, my bad. I had another take previously here, but there was a height of 500 pixels, and all I've done is I've removed that height here. And notice, again, we have our grid of 9 squares. So the first topic on our list to cover today is auto rows. Now, as you can see here, when I set up the grid template columns and grid template rows, I put 3 columns here, each 100 pixels, and then I put 3 rows, each 50 pixels. So the question might be raised, what happens if we have more than 9 grid kind of items? Because this grid is only built to support 9 items. Well, what happens? We're going to go ahead and just do it. We're going to add grid item 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15. And then we just really quick 12, 13, 14, and 15. So if I save this, notice that the new items actually just come in flat. They come in as flat as they can get. Now, you might want this behavior, but if you actually want to determine the size of the rows themselves, or the height of the rows as you create them, notice, again, we've specified each of these rows as 50 pixels, but we could say one of them's 100, and that'll make this one twice as big. But we can actually use another CSS property called grid auto rows. And in doing that, if I specify a size like 50 pixels, it'll make all of the auto rows / implicit rows 50 pixels tall, basically. So yeah, that just allows us to control the new size of our grid items. Now, of course, it doesn't give us like the control, like we can say 50, 150 and make these different sizes. If we put grid auto rows 50 pixels, they'll always come in as 50 pixels as we increase our grid. So that's just one thing to keep in mind. So yeah, that's grid auto rows. Let me go ahead and check that off here. Now, again, going back to a previous kind of analogy, we had auto fit versus auto fill. Now, if you remember here, we at some point had repeat like 1FR here, or my bad, repeat 12, 1FR to get 12 items per kind of like row here. But we did also at some point use auto fit and min max. We used min max. I think it's like that, min max auto dash fit, otherwise 1FR. Let me look up that syntax. Let's see. Let's just double cross, or let's cross-reference it here. So we had autofix, repeat autofit min-max, my bad. So yeah, so we repeat auto-fit or min-max between 100 pixels and 1 fraction unit. And remember what we were doing here is that means it would try to make every grid item 100 pixels, but if not, it would just make it a fraction unit. So basically, it allows us to keep the whole grid occupied. But remember what happens if we remove autofit min-max. If we just had repeat autofit and then 100 pixels, then it would do this. So basically, as the grid gets bigger, it will add grid items if it can, but if it can't, it'll just put white space there. You can see there's a bit of white space here now, but if we again use that autofit min-max, it will automatically raise or grow the cells in order to fit that white space. Now there is another option, and to kind of properly illustrate it, we're going to have to remove a good portion of these grid items. Let's be left with 5. So this is actually a perfect example here. In fact, let's actually go to let's try 8 first. Okay, 8. Perfect. So notice what happens here is we have a regular kind of grid here that's just showing up here. And actually we can use another property called auto fill. And if I save this, notice autofill, it's the same thing. It has the same behavior as autofit. The one place where they differ is when I use autofit, notice as the window gets bigger, all of the items will keep growing to accommodate the entire length. But you may not want that. You may want them to start being 100 pixels. So one thing we could do is instead we can use autofill. And what that'll do is as the window gets bigger, it'll keep adding empty or ghost items basically. Notice there's 2 ghost items here. So it's not white space that it's adding ghost items. So this is where another grid item would be if it existed, rather than autofit, which will just automatically stretch all the items to fit the entire space. So I guess that was just a small demonstration of autofit versus autofill. And then I guess the largest and the biggest kind of cool feature is named areas, or they're also called name lines. And that is where we can specify like names for our lines, which is cool. So I'll kind of demonstrate here. So we're going to go back to this 100 pixels, 100 pixels, 100 pixels deal to get this 9 kind of thing layout. Except actually, let's make them bigger. Let's use fraction units instead. So again, we're going to use 1 fraction unit, 5 fraction units, or yeah, 1 fraction unit, 5 fraction units, and 1 fraction unit. So we'll have like this kind of layout here, and then we'll have like 50 pixels and then like 500 pixels. Right. So this is like an actual like kind of site layout thing with some corners, I guess. And let's add a 9th grid item here, just to get a complete grid layout. So nice. Now we have this separation here of grid items. And let's say that I wanted to use that, remember, grid area to position. So if you remember grid areas or grid template areas, we used strings to visually represent the area itself. But what we can actually do is we can instead use name lines. So to show you what I mean, let's just say our content will start right here. Let's just say this grid 5 here is our content. So again, we have our content right here. And so our content starts in between this 1 fraction unit and 5 fraction unit, aka down this white line right here. So in order to name that, we can say content dash start. And then it ends right here in between the 5 fraction units and the 1 fraction unit on the right. So we can say content dash end. Now instead of, or actually, yeah, also to, sorry, there's some birds in the background. But we can give this div an ID of content. And in our CSS here, we can say content or grid column. Instead of doing, for example, or actually, yeah, let me go ahead and kind of revise the way I've built this grid. So I'm going to remove 4 of the items so that we're left with this, as you can see. And we're actually going to just change this to grid 5. And okay, so sorry, I'm kind of revising the way this thing looks. So we're actually going to make this first grid item here a header that goes across the top. Then we're going to make this grid item 2 an aside here. And then we're going to make number 3 the main content. And then number 4 will be our footer, I guess. We'll just have 4 sections. So again, we'll have ID equals header, ID equals aside, ID equals main or content. We'll just name it main. And then ID equals footer. And remember, this is going back a couple of episodes, but we have our header, our main or our aside, our main, and then we have our footer. And of course, we can say grid column for our header is going to be 1/-1. And remember, that will put it across the top, like here. And we're actually going to name these. Let's say header. Let's say aside. Let's say main, and let's say footer. And okay, so our side here is going to be grid columns 1/1/2. Yes, so the side is just going to be this first little section, and our main is going to be 2/-1, aka 2 to the end. And then finally, our footer grid column is going to be 1 to the end. So again, we have this simple layout here with the header at top, footer on the bottom, and then we have an aside and a main. Now we can actually name, like I said, our sections. So we have content start and content end, which is right here. And actually content ends right here. Content end. So for our main, we instead of saying 2 to -1, we could actually just say grid content or grid column is content. And notice it doesn't change anything. And the reason for that is because we have denoted in our CSS where it starts and where it ends in this little square brackets. And our CSS automatically knows put it here. So for example, if I move this content end in between the 5 fraction units and the 1, it'll instead end right here, like I've specified. But instead, if I move the content end all the way to the end, like I did have it, then it'll move it back here. And of course, we can do this with everything. For example, we can have our site start, or we can name it page start, and then content end. And if we want to have multiple names, we can just do a space and then add page-end. And then if I have right here our header, we'll go from page, we'll cover the whole page, and same with the footer. The footer will cover the whole page. And then with aside, we want to basically have it go from this first one, so page start, and then we can also say aside start, to content start or aside end. So just like that, we can make our grid column the aside. And so this is just a simple way to kind of name, instead of just saying, hey, I want to, no, I didn't. Yeah, instead of just saying, hey, I want our thing to kind of go from here to here, and, you know, and basically dictate the number of columns that you want it to go, you could instead put names behind those, and that way, let's say again, let's say we wanted the page, the content to suddenly end here after the 5 fraction units, content-end. Well, we could actually have multiple grid items relying on that content name. So we could basically, in essence, use variables in a way in CSS. These aren't CSS variables, but they're in a way like grid variables, so that we can change one value and it may change a bunch of elements, but we only have to change the value in one place, basically. So yeah, that was pretty much the use case of named columns or named areas. And it is really useful because, again, it allows you to organize all of your things, and now here you only have to type out this simple code. So in the next video, we are going to be going over kind of wrapping up all of the knowledge that we've been learning over this mini-series. And if you want to see that, go ahead and check out the playlist linked in the description, where I'll be uploading it tomorrow. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for notifications whenever I post new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.